At this moment, you're effectively carrying knowledge tied to roughly $720 million, and no one around you has the slightest clue. Not the people living right next door, not your friends, not even the cafe staff member who has poured you black coffee for years, with quiet routine consistency. On the surface, nothing in your life signals anything unusual. There's no disappearance act, no dramatic reinvention. You simply exist in plain sight, so normal it almost becomes camouflage. While others chase success like it keeps shifting just out of reach, you've already stepped into something concrete, without announcement or noise. The strange part is how it starts. There's no burst of emotion, no moment of celebration. Instead, it comes through a dull corporate message titled Q3 Portfolio Summary. No urgency, no spectacle. Just you standing in a hardware store aisle, slowly turning a half-inch plumbing piece in your hand as if the entire world has collapsed into that one small object. That is what $720 million resembles in real life. It doesn't begin with luxury or attention. It begins in the corner of a hospital staff room, beside a vending machine that hums softly without anyone noticing. At first, nothing feels different. It's just an ordinary shift, ending like any other. You're heading toward the elevator that leads to the parking garage when something subtle interrupts your routine. The nearby water dispenser is empty, and the snack machine beside it is stuck. Most people would ignore it and continue walking. You don't. You pause. Something about that small malfunction holds your attention in a way you can't immediately justify. A simple thought slips in, almost casually at first. Who actually owns a setup like this? That question doesn't disappear when you leave. It travels with you, quietly looping in the background as you go home. Eventually, you spend nearly an hour digging into it, far more time than anyone normally invests in something so easily overlooked. What you uncover doesn't look impressive at first. It's just a single operator managing around a dozen machines spread across various buildings, earning somewhere between $45 and $110 per unit each month, after costs and location fees. On paper, it seems almost trivial. The kind of thing you wouldn't even call a business at first glance. Just faint numbers on a screen, while the rest of your room stays still and silent. Still, you begin calculating, and that's when the shift happens. If one machine generates about $85 in monthly profit, then 5 produce around $425. 10 reach roughly $850. And once you imagine 25 machines placed carefully in the right spots, the figure expands into something like $1,300 to $3,100 every month, arriving consistently, without your constant involvement. What stays with you isn't even the income. It's the underlying structure. The fact that the machine never argues, never demands anything, never loses focus. It simply exists in a hallway, offering small conveniences to strangers, and in return, it produces steady returns with mechanical consistency. You decide to test it. A used unit costs about $950. Slightly worn, a few marks from time, but still fully functional. You install it in the entrance of a mid-sized dental clinic and agree on a simple profit split with nothing more than a handshake. By the end of the first month, it brings in roughly $310 before deductions. After the location share, refilling costs, and maintenance trips, you are left with around $210. $210. Less than what someone on your team earns in a single weekend shift. Meanwhile, your cousin once received a signing bonus that would equal years of that machine's output. From the outside, nothing changes. Your life looks exactly the same. You sit with that number alone on a quiet night, feeling something difficult to label. Not excitement, not disappointment, but a quiet analytical weight, as if your thinking is recalibrating around a new baseline. And still, you continue. Because your attention isn't really on the $210. It's on what that $210 is quietly beginning to reveal. The result doesn't just check out. It proves the system is real. And once that clicks, you stop overthinking, you move. A second unit is added, then almost immediately a third follows. Your perspective begins to shift. Laundromats stop feeling like ordinary services, almost the way vending machines once did in your mind. They start to resemble hidden infrastructure. Everyday buildings whose ownership sits quietly underneath the surface. When you look closer, a consistent picture emerges. A modest laundromat, maybe 15 washers and dryers tucked into a strip mall off a highway, can bring in somewhere around $65,000 to more than 210 a year in revenue. Another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. When these businesses fail, it's rarely because demand disappears. People don't suddenly stop needing clean clothes. Recessions don't erase laundry. Markets dip, uncertainty rises, and still the machines keep running. Load after load, week after week, year after year. The breakdown is almost always operational, not structural. Then you make your first move into ownership. A laundromat purchased for $52,000 in a working-class area of Ohio. The machines are aged but functional. The lease still has about 5 years left on it. The previous owner, Harold Jensen, a retired postal worker, ran everything through a flip phone and a worn notebook. The records are messy, inconsistent, but the cash flow underneath tells a different story. Stable, predictable, alive. By the time the first year under your control ends, the business produces roughly $41,000 in net income. There's no moment of celebration. It's treated like fuel, capital for whatever comes next. This is the part most people never talk about. Not the scaling, not the portfolio, not the idea of compounding over time. It's the quiet repetition of decisions that look almost trivial in isolation. Someone sitting at a kitchen table late at night, doing basic math. A small observation on a Tuesday becomes a question on Wednesday, a purchase on Thursday, and slowly something larger begins to take shape. Something that still doesn't have a clear name. Because the number was never the real point. The structure underneath it was. Your accountant now is Marcy Bennett, a woman who has spent nearly 20 years keeping books for small operators, corner stores, food joints, repair shops. She has seen every kind of financial disorder imaginable, from chaotic LLCs to owners who treat shoeboxes as filing systems. You meet her in the back office of your third laundromat. A simple folding table sits between you. You slide a folder across it containing everything you currently own. She reviews it slowly, page by page, without any immediate reaction. After a long silence, she finally looks up and says, "I've rarely seen a portfolio this intentionally plain." She says it like a criticism. You take it as validation. Because what you've built isn't branding or storytelling or some polished narrative. It's a quiet collection of assets tied to unglamorous but unavoidable human needs, generating steady monthly cash flow, whether anyone pays attention or not. Inside that folder are 4 coin laundromats spread across 2 Midwestern states. Together, they produce about $305,000 in annual revenue. After utilities, maintenance, and part-time staffing, the net income settles close to $120,000. At first glance, nothing about it feels attention-grabbing. It's not the kind of story that makes a podcast producer lean forward or hit pause. But underneath that quiet surface is a rhythm that doesn't break, money arriving in consistent intervals, almost identical to rent. That's not a metaphor, it functions exactly like one. Laundry services run on uninterrupted human necessity. Recessions don't get a vote in whether people stop needing clean clothes. Then there are 2 municipal parking assets picked up through county tax auctions. Those subdued Tuesday morning sessions in public buildings where most chairs remain empty. The first required an investment of $31,000. The second came in at $44,500. Once upkeep and insurance are accounted for, they collectively clear a bit more than $58,000 in yearly net profit. Operationally, you're out of the picture. A part-time supervisor manages the ground-level details. What remains is passive oversight. Deposits appearing on schedule, forming a predictable pattern that replaces day-to-day involvement. Alongside that, 3 highway billboards stand positioned along major corridors through Tennessee and Kentucky. The income doesn't come from renting ad space. It comes from owning the land beneath the structures. Media firms lease that ground under long-term agreements, typically spanning 5 to 15 years, often with small annual increases built in. Each site brings in roughly $800 to $1,400 every month through land leases. You can go weeks without thinking about them at all. There is also a commercial cleaning operation. You acquired it 3 years ago from a retiring owner in his late 60s named Harold Jenkins, who had spent 28 years building it into something driven more by momentum than active control. It now services 12 contracted accounts, including office buildings, a medical clinic, and 2 school districts. Yearly revenue sits slightly above $1.1 million. Profit margins aren't dramatic, but they are dependable. This is the kind of business that sheds clients slowly, replaces them slowly, and almost never makes noise in the market. Lydia Shaw goes back through the folder and asks if you're considering something more aggressive. Tech, startups, multifamily real estate, anything designed for rapid upside. You say no, she gives a small nod, as if she anticipated it, though the reasoning behind it doesn't fully translate for her. What she doesn't immediately grasp is the logic tying everything together. Every page in that folder points back to the same principle: demand that doesn't disappear, not in downturns, not when interest rates rise, not when platforms shift or consumer behavior evolves. Cars still need places to park. Laundry still has to be done. Dust still settles in buildings every day, and someone is always paid to remove it. Drivers on highways will still notice what's placed in front of them, whether they intend to or not. There is no software layer that replaces any of this cleanly. No sudden innovation poised to eliminate a parking lot or fully automate rent collection from land beneath a billboard. That is precisely the advantage. The louder players, the ones raising capital, chasing exponential curves, broadcasting every decision in real time, are operating in arenas where attention itself is the entry fee. Competition never pauses there, and visibility becomes a constant form of pressure. One underwhelming quarter can be all it takes to wipe out 3 years of forward momentum. You don't really step into those arenas in the first place. It's intentional, a quiet refusal, almost rigid in its consistency. Instead, your world stays anchored in the Tuesday morning economy, where nobody is doom scrolling or reacting to breaking news. Systems there move slowly. Predictably, they keep operating in the background long after whatever big opportunity popped up down the street has already faded out. Lydia Shaw shuts the folder sitting on her desk. The quarterly report, she says, will be ready by Thursday. You acknowledge her, thank her, and leave the room. Outside, your ride is a 2019 Honda Pilot with 91,000 miles on it. The rear bumper still cracked after 8 months of saying you'll fix it soon. Somehow, that never quite becomes a priority. At a networking event, you notice a man immediately, the kind who feels completely at home in spaces like this. Clean designer white t-shirt, probably in the mid-hundreds range, something you only confirmed later after checking. He exits a matte gray Range Rover with a custom finish and talks about investments like they're extensions of his identity. Every sentence calibrated for the room around him. His wealth isn't just real. It's displayed, staged, maintained like a performance. You show up in the same worn Honda Pilot, mileage faded into its paint, cracked bumper still there, a discount fleece jacket from a big box sporting store. Your watch does one thing and one thing only. It tells time. When he asks what you do, you answer without emphasis. Some small businesses, a couple of laundromats, a few quiet operations on the side. You catch the shift in his face as he processes the contrast, the car, the jacket, the low-key response. A polite smile appears. His body subtly angles toward someone else. Mentally, he's already moved on. Not enough signal to invest attention. And oddly enough, that dismissal is the advantage. Once people underestimate you, you effectively slip off their radar. And off the radar is where movement becomes effortless. Most people misunderstand what quiet wealth really is. They assume it's about humility or rejecting status games altogether. For you, it's neither philosophy nor identity. It's strategy, a layer of camouflage used deliberately. An ordinary-looking life isn't an accident. It functions as protection. The Honda isn't a statement piece. It's a tool. It starts every morning, handles highway miles, and blends into any parking lot without attracting a second glance. The average new car today sits around $48,000. Monthly payments land near $735. You bought that Pilot 3 years ago in cash and haven't done much beyond fuel and basic maintenance since. Every dollar not tied up in payments gets pushed into assets that actually grow. That's the equation. Simple, quiet, and easy for most people to overlook. Your home says more about you than most people ever notice. Tucked away on a quiet suburban street stands a modest 3-bedroom colonial. Nothing flashy, nothing that invites attention. You bought it more than a decade ago, and for the past 3 years, the mortgage has been completely settled. To anyone passing by, you look like a steady small business owner, living a comfortable, predictable life. They're not wrong, but they're only seeing the surface of something far larger. and you've never felt the need to correct their assumptions. Over time, you learned something most people never fully absorb. Being seen comes with a hidden price tag that has nothing to do with income. Once people suspect you have resources, their relationship with you subtly shifts. They stop treating you as just another person and start treating you as a potential solution. At first, it's faint, easy to ignore, but it builds. Then the patterns begin. Unknown numbers appear on your phone. A relative you haven't heard from in years suddenly reconnects. Someone from your community casually mentions a venture they're trying to get off the ground. A distant cousin presents a property deal that just needs a small boost to move forward. You've watched this happen enough times in other people's lives to recognize it instantly. Wealth, once it becomes visible, changes how every room feels. Not always from bad intentions, and often without anyone realizing it, but because people naturally respond to perceived opportunity. So you stay deliberately ordinary. Simple jackets, a reliable SUV, routine errands at plain laundromats. These become part of a quiet strategy. Nothing about you signals excess, just stability. It takes almost no effort, but it protects something far more valuable than appearance: freedom from becoming everyone else's solution. At a recent networking gathering, you notice a man in an expensive designer shirt fully locked into conversation with a startup founder. He leans forward, energized, performing the familiar social choreography of status and ambition. You grab a glass of water, exchange a few words with the two people you actually came to see, and leave not long after 8 o'clock. On your way home, you pass a self-serve car wash that's unusually active for a weekday night. Your eyes linger for a moment, as they often do, thinking about ownership, about what sits behind the visible surface of places like that. The SUV just carries you forward, asking nothing in return. There are only a handful of people you trust without question, and Evan Cole is one of them. You met him back in college. Years of pickup basketball on Sundays, shared silence at difficult moments, and he was there at your mother's funeral. He's the kind of friend who calls without needing anything. No angle, no expectation. That kind of consistency is rare. About 3 months ago, Evan called you again on a Wednesday. At first, it felt routine, but there was a different weight behind his voice this time. He'd spent a little over 3 years building a food truck business from the ground up. It had started to gain real traction: strong reviews, loyal customers, even some local media attention. Now he wanted to take the next step, turning it into a permanent restaurant in a promising downtown location. The plan made sense. The timing made sense. What he needed was $90,000. And you could have made that decision before the call even ended. Sitting in your car outside a laundromat, it would have taken only a moment, and the number itself wouldn't have meant much at all. In practical terms, 90,000 was barely a ripple in your financial picture, roughly equivalent to about 12 days of passive income flowing through your portfolio. It wasn't really a financial strain. It didn't even register as a true dilemma on paper, and yet you still didn't move the money. You stayed on the line, phone pressed to your ear, fully aware of both sides of the moment. That strange awareness, knowing exactly what you are capable of, and still choosing to hold back, settled over you in a way that felt heavier than numbers could explain. There isn't a simple word for it. It's not guilt, it's not selfishness either. It's closer to a quiet isolation that comes from seeing the full shape of a situation while someone you care about is still standing inside it, unable to see the edges. And over time, you've come to understand something you didn't want to learn so slowly. When money enters a system that isn't structurally stable, it doesn't fix anything. It just speeds everything up. Weak operations don't strengthen under pressure. They stretch. If cash flow isn't understood, if revenue gets mistaken for actual margin, if a lease quietly tightens its grip while the business looks healthy on the surface, then capital doesn't rescue it. It simply accelerates the version of failure that was already forming. You've witnessed that outcome before. Not with Evan Cole, but you've seen enough to recognize the pattern. So instead of transferring anything, you asked him to come by on Saturday morning. He showed up, and the kitchen table became a workspace. A notebook came out. Numbers started to spread across the page. For about 4 hours, you went through everything side by side. Two expense categories stood out immediately: quiet drains that had been eating into his margins without being obvious day to day. You started asking sharper questions. What exactly were the lease escalation terms? How strong was the personal guarantee? What would actually happen if, 18 months in, Foot traffic dropped by 30% instead of matching projections. Some of those answers weren't there. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because no one had ever forced those questions into the open with him. The pattern continued. Another Saturday, then another. By the fourth weekend, things had already begun to shift. Evan Cole had renegotiated supplier agreements, discovered an SBA lending option he qualified for, and reworked his expansion plans so aggressively that the original need for outside funding disappeared entirely. Between an SBA program and a small city grant, he secured around $60,000 on his own terms. 5 weeks after that, he signed the lease. He called you the night he got the keys. His voice cracked in a way people's voices do when something they've carried for years finally becomes real. He told you, without hesitation, that he wouldn't have gotten there without you. You never mentioned the amount you could have sent, and you likely never will. Not out of humility, but because the outcome needed to belong fully to him, built from his decisions, not softened or reshaped by a check that would have rewritten the meaning of the entire story. There are corners of a person that stay sealed no matter how close anyone gets. Not hidden in the old sense anymore. You've already come to terms with it. But because there's a quiet strain in watching someone you care about struggle with something you could fix in seconds and choosing not to. Living with that clarity until it becomes routine, sitting across a scuffed kitchen table week after week, letting 4 silent Saturdays pass without breaking it. Your life keeps its frame intact. Each day moves forward behind an almost invisible barrier. Money flows and compounds in the background. Assets quietly expanding without applause or audience. No interruptions, no questions. Still, that lack of attention has weight to it. Some nights, it feels like a subtle cost you never stopped paying. The notification arrives on a Thursday at 7:12 a.m. You're standing in a Home Depot aisle surrounded by rows of plumbing supplies, even though you hadn't planned to linger. A small team now handles most errands, but one of the laundromats you manage has a backed-up utility sink, and the property manager had just sent over a photo. You were already nearby, so you stopped in. A bottle of drain cleaner sits in your hand, while your other hand holds your phone. You're trying to remember whether the pipe under that sink is PVC or metal, because choosing wrong would matter more than it should. That's when the alert appears. Subject line, Q2, Portfolio Summary, Final. It's from Lydia Shaw, your accountant. Her messages never change in rhythm or tone. Same structure, same plain formatting she's used for nearly 20 years. Usually you'd leave it for later, something to read at home with coffee gone cold beside you. This time, the preview alone makes you hesitate. You place the bottle back on the shelf, open the email, read it once, then again, slower, as if repetition might make the numbers shift into something else. At the top, the figure is undeniable. Your verified net worth, real estate, business equity, cash reserves, and investments combined, has crossed $720 million. You stay there under the harsh fluorescent lights. Somewhere deeper in the store, a forklift reverses with a steady electronic warning beep. A man in a gray hoodie beside you compares metal fittings without a second glance in your direction. No one looks up. No one registers anything unusual. The number exists only on a screen, held by someone still gripping a bottle of industrial cleaner, standing in the middle of a simple repair errand at a laundromat in Ohio. And that's what makes it feel so unreal. No celebration, no witness, no call marking the moment. Only the sharp smell of chemicals, the constant hum of ceiling lights, and a fortune built piece by piece through years of quiet Tuesdays, routine transfers, and unremarked Saturdays at kitchen tables that never made it into any photograph. You expected it to feel like a turning point, like something in the atmosphere would tilt, like reality itself would briefly pause and acknowledge that a threshold had been crossed. In your mind, milestones always came with that invisible ceremony, a clear before and after, almost like a line you could physically stand on either side of. But nothing opens up like that. There is no break in reality, only the plumbing aisle, the forklift moving somewhere in the distance, an email from Lydia Shaw sitting unfinished in your head, and the steady mechanical noise of an ordinary day that refuses to rearrange itself just because a figure has changed. You send Lydia Shaw a short reply. Just 3 words. All good, checks out. Then you lift the drain cleaner again. Snap a quick photo of the label for the property manager and head toward the register without hesitation. The receipt comes out to $8.47. You don't scan a loyalty card, partly because you never remember if one exists, partly because it doesn't feel relevant enough to matter. In the car, you don't immediately start driving. You just sit there for a moment, hands resting, engine off, letting the silence settle. More than a decade back, you had ended up with $210 from a broken vending machine in a dental office lobby. You remember sitting with that number on a random Thursday night, trying to understand what it meant, unable to label the emotion behind it. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't disappointment either. And it definitely wasn't something you would ever tell anyone about. And now it's the same sensation again. Identical at its core, only expanded, stretched across more zeros. That realization is unsettling in a quiet way, because it suggests the number was never the point at all. What mattered was the structure underneath it, the way a system quietly proves itself over time, without applause, without recognition, without anyone in a laundromat supply aisle ever noticing it happening. You turn the key and start the engine. The broken drain at the laundromat is still waiting. It isn't going anywhere on its own. You drive back the same route, past the same signs, the same gas station, the same small crack along the bumper you still haven't fixed. Nothing visible about your life has shifted in this stretch of time. Nothing will look different tomorrow either. The laundromat will open again at 6. Lydia Shaw will likely follow up with another question about quarterly numbers. Evan Cole's food truck will be wrapped in its usual lunchtime line, but something quieter has changed beneath all of that. In the middle of an otherwise ordinary week, you'll eventually watch someone spend money just to appear like they have it, and something in you will register it differently than it would have years ago. The separation between looking wealthy and actually building it, something most people never fully see in the same moment. That awareness doesn't make the work easier. It just changes the questions that linger afterward. Like, what, exactly, is being built here, and who it's really for?